Hi, I want in this video to prove to you that there is a viable way to secure the Mexican-American border and normalize relations, including immigration, between our two countries. Immigration is an issue which I have addressed since I first ran for office, beginning in July 2010. It's one of the issues that motivated me to run. The other issues were the bailout, the Obamacare, and the Gitmo. Shutting down Gitmo and bringing it to Thompson, Illinois, just 100 miles down the river from Minnesota here. So what is it that motivated me about immigration? What motivated me at that time was the problems they were having in Arizona, the same ones that Trump is addressing, except the bigger concern was people coming across the border and taking jobs that the people of Arizona couldn't have. And so some of the measures that were being used at that time, I felt, were unconstitutional. You just see some people hanging around where they think trucks will pick them up, and they look like they're Mexican, so the police would have them show their immigration papers. Well, this does violate the Constitution. It is obviously profiling. I thought it was unconstitutional and said so, because everybody has to work, and then to get money they need to live, to make it pay, and so I'm not against that. But there's a problem that we have, the kind of development we have, economic development, job development, that we have along the border. It's spotty. And in a case like this, where you've got jobs that are there, now a lot of these were agricultural. They'd find people to jump on a truck and work very hard, picking crops as fast as they could, and throwing them in the sacks so that the grower could recover their crop and stay in business. I don't think any of us are really against that. But the problem that we've seen is that it can grow to get out of control. So all of a sudden, we have employers that are basically exploiting this market, this labor market, to the detriment of any Americans that need to get started working. So we don't want to act unconstitutionally. We want to secure our borders, and we've got to have job development. It's not good enough to just create businesses that need to exploit low-wage labor. And I think that all the independent candidates for president this year, 2016, talking about Trump, Sanders, and myself, are agreed on this, that the exploitation of low-wage labor leads to the exploitation of Americans as well as Mexican nationals. Now, Mexico, there's not a lot of opportunity in Mexico for so many people, and we have a lot more opportunity in the U.S., but that opportunity is at risk, and it can go down, so that it's nothing but an exploitative, low-wage labor market. Now, why would we need to do this as Americans? Let's make America great again. So I agree, we want to make America great again. I'm sure all of us have a different idea of what that means. For some people, it might be hanging around down at the A&W root beer stand in the drive-in, eating the best hamburgers and meeting all kinds of people. But what it really means is that we make full use of our ability to create jobs and commerce and create a high quality of life for all of our citizens. Now, in order to do this, we can require that there are some low-wage workers available, because it takes all kinds of workers. And there's no doubt that when you've got a job to be done, every hand that you can get of hard workers is going to be the best way to run any business. As we all know, these businesses get taxed. They pay costs of all kinds and need to get licenses, need to have overhead, their building to work in, they need to get their equipment, they need to be competitive, so that with all these costs, they can pay them and still make money. And we're seeing in America just how hard it is to do that, as our recovery comes back with a lot of part-time jobs, low-wage jobs, and we see immigrants all over the country that are impacting these job markets, including here in Minnesota. But we really want people to make more money if they can, so that they can spend or save more money. And one of my ideas is to create millions of jobs right away by allowing the states to enforce their usury laws. That means to require people coming in here from New York or California selling credit cards through the mail and special offers, and then they hook people in and they're able to charge them, starting out at about 18%. And sometimes might make a temporary offer, and some people jump around from credit card to credit card and try to take advantage of temporary offers. But eventually, all of us are getting hooked in credit cards that charge us more than our state's usury rate. And because of that, our banks can't compete because they have to stay under the usury rate, and they're competing against out-of-state banks, that's called foreign lenders, that are charging much more. That means they make a lot more money and can spend more on marketing, and it becomes just a vicious cycle. They might think it's a virtuous cycle, but for those of us who have to pay those rates, and there were 35% of households in the United States in collection in 2014, that means they're basically earning money to pay nothing but the interest on foreign lenders. They're not able to buy the things, the goods and services they need. Now, if they were able to, if they could normalize their household consumer debt, they could spend that money on things they need. And people in their state could make money by expanding businesses or starting new businesses to meet that growing need. And that's what we need to do. Of course, this is one of my ideas. This is about immigration. And so it's really a vicious cycle. It's not a virtuous cycle, as some of the big Wall Street banks might think it is. And so I believe that if we did that, it would create millions of jobs. Now, if we implemented my plan for immigration, which is what this video is about, but it's also about job creation, I believe it would add 2% to the GDP every year. And it would make America strong again economically. It would make it great again because the borders would be secure and the laws would be enforced at a much better historical level, much better compared to what we remember America was. But it would also make us economically strong. And so what is that plan? Well, first of all, secure the border. My plan is to secure the border, and I'm just going to compare it to Trump's plan. And then I'm going to run through how it's different, how it's better, or maybe Trump could even look at some of these ideas, if he wants, to make his plan better. But the first step is to secure the border. The difference between Trump and me, and it's not that vast, is binational cooperation between Mexico and the United States. Now, he has binational cooperation because he wants to have Mexico pay for the wall. Now, that would definitely be the binational cooperation, and I think that he can and should do that. And we should do that. And if elected, I would do that. And I think that even though they pay for it, they should view it as an investment, as an upfront cost that would yield much greater benefits and replace all of the income that they're trying to get from the United States each year through the transfer of illegal wages back to Mexico. That's about $47 billion. Now, I think Trump is talking about just keeping the kind of trade deals that they currently have, Mexico currently has with the United States, and make them better. Now, I think, and I'll show you how we could go even further, but securing the border is certainly the goal number one. There should be protection along the border so that it will stop the flow of illegal immigrants. And I'm going to discuss how Trump's plan actually works because most people don't know. And they have a lot of people hollering in the media about rounding up 11 million people in the night, and then you have other people who might support Trump's plan for the wrong reasons, which I don't think they would do if they knew what was actually possible, and I'm going to tell you. One of the things that I agree with all Trump supporters on is that we need to get this done. We've had too many people talking about it, and now we need to go further, and we need to carry it out. And we've got to the point where the Democrats are even trying to build more quotas using immigrants. They're naturalizing people in a program using taxpayer dollars to get them on the voting rolls so that they can boost the Democrats. And I question the constitutionality and legality of that. These are more Democrat delegate quotas so that they can lock in and engineer the kind of presidential and national candidates they want to field to carry out a plan in Washington, which clearly is dangerous in many ways. And I can discuss that in another video. More of the details of the dangers of the Democratic plan. Now, to get back to the next step, then in Trump's plan, you've actually got basically 3 steps. Number 1, secure the border. I've touched on that. Number 2, is increase the level of legalization of the immigrants that are here. So instead of 20% legal, you're going to get more to 100% legal. And my plan would do that too, and I'll tell you how. And then the third step of his is to create jobs for American first. So that part of the problem is the loss of jobs. And we need employers, as I said at the beginning, that are going to create productive jobs, sustainable jobs, jobs that are not based on exploitative labor costs, especially near the border, so that they're just trying to do everything on the cheap near the border. We need people to make a little larger investment, and one of the things that means is they feel secure in their investment. So when the border is secure, the employers are going to create more secure jobs and communities. And ultimately, we're going to locate more financial resources on the border so that these resources can be used to secure the border itself. So this is a virtuous cycle. So I want binational cooperation on securing the border. Now I agree that Mexico should pay for a wall, but I would want them to view that as an upfront cost, not to offend or disrespect Mexicans in any way. We want to be great neighbors, not just good neighbors, but we want to make the border great again, if you will. We both have very respectable peoples. Now Mexico has always had the largest city in this hemisphere, Mexico City, and it is an amazing place. And the people who comprise the Mexicans have built things like, long before Western civilization had anything like it, they built the pyramids down there. They have pyramids there, they have pyramids in Egypt, and the Mayan civilization in Mexico was very advanced for that time mathematically, and they're good, even great engineers. And this kind of thing has continued. A lot of great civilizations have come to Mexico City. And however, when you get north to the border, near the United States, there's not been that kind of development. And so when the United States was being born and expanding the land out there, the land out there was really no man's land as far as the great national powers went, burgeoning national powers. And so both the Spaniards and the English, the Hispanos and the Anglos, and the rest of the people that came to both of their settlements from all over Europe had a lot of different influences. The U.S. was mostly along the coast before the acquisition of Mexico, of what was 7 states, in 7 of our states that are cut out of Mexican land, that again, it was just a broad claim. I mean, they claimed the land up here across the Mississippi River in Minnesota was supposed to be Spanish land too. Okay, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history, but probably in another video, because right now I want to talk about how that border came to be and how the problems about that border can be solved in an excellent way that I think everybody will agree with. And so the U.S. was mostly along the coast before the acquisition of that land, and the Spanish civilization was concentrated in Mexico City along that coast and transportation routes. And nobody really went out and set this border up. That border was not established until the conclusion, or really the beginning, of that Mexican-American War. And I can talk a little bit at the end about how that occurred. But the key thing is that you have 2 great civilizations and 2 countries that reflect those great civilizations, but they're different kinds. Mexico and Spain are more tropical. They're more Mediterranean, Southern European, and Central American. They're in that latitude range, whereas Europe went way north. And the first to discover this continent from Europe were Vikings, such as myself in terms of ethnic origin. We were able to develop Canada in North America because we were adept in those climates and those latitudes and technology. And so they're very different, and yet we converge on the border of the Rio Grande River running from the Gulf of Mexico and Alabama and Texas over to California. And so the point being that we're 2 great civilizations and we're 2 great neighbors. But because the border has been largely neglected by both countries, we haven't developed it. And because we haven't developed it, we have not developed a proper relation. And so the first thing to do in my plan is, yes, to secure that border with a wall using binational cooperation and security. But we also need to have binational cooperation in human rights. Bilingualism, too, must be a part of this. And so this has always been my plan. And where can we get this cooperation? Well, there is a Border Governors Conference that meets at least annually. It consists of all these states, which I mentioned on the U.S. side, and about 10 Mexican states. Now, because there is little opportunity in northern Mexico, and more of the population is coming north looking for opportunity, they're also coming into the United States. And what we need to do is stop and define that border. Now, the Border Governors Conference, including those north of the border in the United States of America, and then the ones south of the border in the United States of Mexico, they've got about 10 states that border on this line. And this was set up, the line was set up by the Treaty of Guadalupe de Hidalgo. Now, that treaty is very important to any plan, and I'll tell you why. You hear all this discussion about birthright citizenship, the 14th Amendment, about anchor babies. That's people from all over the world that come here to have a child born, so that under current interpretation of our Constitution, they are thought to have access to U.S. citizenship on that basis. And so you hear a lot about this. And the thing about the treaty is that it defined what U.S. citizenship is for the Mexican people, for the Mexican nationals. So the Supreme Court has to look at the fact that the Congress has already adopted a treaty in 1848 that affects all of the Mexican nationals insofar as citizenship. And when you read in things like, oh, well, we had the Civil War and we had the 14th Amendment trying to ensure the freed slaves, former slaves, would not be deprived of any citizenship rights on the basis of the fact that they hadn't passed this or that citizenship test. If they were born here, the 14th Amendment says, those slaves, they were Americans. And that's what was put in the 14th Amendment. But the question of citizenship for Mexican nationals had already been determined in that Treaty of Guadalupe de Hidalgo. And that was that any Mexican national who remained north of that line along the Rio Grande for more than 1 year after the treaty was ratified, and that took some time, that they would then become American citizens, full citizens, with no requirements that they speak English or give up their culture. They were recognized as Americans just as American Indians are recognized as Americans, although they, if they live on the reservation, they have treaties covering them too, or if they're part of a tribe, which determine their status. But you can't continue to argue about birthright citizenship when, in fact, it has already been ratified by the Senate, and yet the Supreme Court is. Now, I want to go on and talk about how we can increase the citizenship north of the border once we have secured that border, or I would go so far as to say while we're securing that border. Now, I said I have in my plan a way that does that. Now, here's what it is. It is that economic development along the border of those quality, sustainable enterprises which need quality, sustainable workforce, and they're not just exploiting temporary citizenship, temporary status in order to drive the wages down. So to review the first step, no matter what Donald Trump tells you, or the supporters like Marco Rubio of the Senate plan for immigration, there is no other way to secure the border than the way I'm describing. Now, Donald Trump can do it because his plan is totally consistent with my plan. But my plan, then, is the best way to secure the border. So I can say that Donald Trump does my plan by getting Mexico to build the wall, because he's securing bilateral, binational cooperation between Mexico and the U.S., these two great civilizations. And so this is a good way to do it. But we also need the cooperation of the states along the border, because that wall is going to serve them. And they're going to be a stakeholder in that. And they're the ones that are going to make the wall work. And now, the second step, I'm talking about economic development on the border. So this really locks in that security. Now, it's already happening. In 2010 $1 billion a day, or $365 billion a year in trade between Mexico and the United States. Here in Minnesota, they're one of our top trading partners, and we're up on the northern end near the Canadian border. But they're a big trading partner for us, and I would like for them to become an even bigger trading partner for the many states throughout the United States. Part of my vision is to reverse the growth of the federal debt and federal deficit by transitioning power and resources out of Washington back to the 50 states. So Minnesota is just one of the states that I know can benefit greatly through this immigration plan by increasing the economic development on the southern border with Mexico, because they're already one of our trading partners, and every state in the Union needs to work separately and also together to increase their trade with Mexico. So there's already $1 billion a day in trade going back and forth, and it's of great value to each country and to the states, and an opportunity for all the states. So I know that Minnesota, for instance, could potentially open up commercial trade relations with all 10 states along the Mexican border, because all of it should be developed. Now, 2/3 of that border is the Rio Grande River, or is rivers, so there already is a potential water source there for this economic development. I believe there needs to be much more desalinization on both the great oceans coasts that are near, both the Pacific and Atlantic, and that needs to grow the water supply for development, for settlement along that entire border. But if you can envision having jobs on the southern side of the border that are integrated and linked in with transportation, with security, with human rights on both sides of the border. So on the southern side, you're going to have that, let's say, going 25 miles in, and on the northern side, you're going to have it all along the border in an international border zone that's so integrated that locks together companies and communities between the north and south all along the border with adequate water supply, with walls, with Donald Trump's walls, and because that wall will be for the Mexican side, it will secure commercial and industrial zones as well as communities of Mexicans who can work, who can move into that zone, possibly from the United States, if they don't have legal status, and be part of an international zone. Now, I have no doubt that there could be economic investment from all over the world. Mexicans love to trade with everyone, I know, and you can have the Asian investment there, European investment there, whatever is worked out with those states, and through them with the government of Mexico and the United States, providing development and opportunity for everybody, while defining and securing the border. It's not enough to simply delimit the border and then secure it, which is what we're talking about now. It has to, I think, be part of a package whereby you define the nature of that border. And so the best way to do that, then, is to work locally, to provide opportunity globally, so that you will define and integrate that border, and to have a development plan with short-term and long-term goals for investment, then that should be committed to and supported by communities all along the border. Now, am I telling people what to do? Would I be saying we should tell people what to do on that border? No, we should present opportunities, but we need security. In order to have security, we need to invest and deploy the resources along that border so that it's self-sustaining. So the Mexican government should build that wall, and the primary reason for that is it's their people who are primarily coming across that border. They, Mexico, are benefiting a great deal from the commercial relations with the United States. But we are having a great cost. In the meantime, it's deteriorating the economic conditions in this country as a whole, which is basically going to detract from that opportunity for the future. And so that's why I think the second step is defining that border, giving it its character as a successful, prosperous international region between two great countries. Now, I know a lot of it looks like desert right now, and probably is desert. However, with the right investment, we can change the nature of that border. And over time, the investment in securing the border through building a wall will pay off because it will create a more certain business environment for firms and enterprises to locate there, to build communities in that area in a positive way, to define our future and our relations for the future in a more positive way. Now, I don't view this as utopian. I view this as very practical and actually the only way that we can secure the border. Everybody talks about it. This is the only way it can be done. Because I think we all know that if you don't deploy development along a border, that it will be overrun. Any wall that you can build can be overrun. But you can deploy border security. Well, first of all, that's more government jobs. So for every government job, there have to be private sector jobs to pay the taxes for that. Probably at the state and local and federal level will all be paying more and more taxes. But if you leverage that security and that investment in security to create a more certain investment environment, then you have that base to pay for adequate security. The nature of this wall would not be to separate and to divide these two great nations, but to integrate them by defining the border which has emerged from the growth and the clash, you could say, of these two great nations, civilizations in the 19th century, culminating in the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe de Hidalgo, which delimited it and created the citizenship requirements for the Mexican nationals to become U.S. citizens. And we should go with that treaty. And it's the best thing that we have going between us, and we should stick with it. But we should also, as we go with the treaty, we should make the best use of it. We should use it as a benefit. There is no reason except a lack of leadership and a lack of communication to activate both of these apart from smart workers. We need that to develop the border as an economic enterprise zone of international scope. So if we have the leadership, the communications, and the smart workers, of which there's about 11 million in the United States that we're talking about, all of these can be the basis for creating opportunity for them and for developing an economic enterprise zone of international scope. Now then, this will create jobs for Americans north of the border and also south of the border, because we'll be working to create parts, for instance, which will be vertically integrated into production on the southern side of the border, creating greater wealth for Mexico, and vice versa. And for Mexico, it will be much more wealth than is currently sent back to Mexico by their Mexican nationals, working illegally in the United States each year. We can easily outstrip that, I would say, within the first 1 or 2 years. And so it's a win-win for everybody. The whole point is, the reason why this is the number one issue and why we're getting behind Trump on this, which is again totally consistent with what I'm advocating, is that this is going to save us all a lot more money. We're going to stabilize it just like we can stabilize the Middle East, as I've discussed in another one of my videos on coming to terms with Islam at my YouTube site. But we're going to stabilize the economy in the U.S. We're going to create a more certain environment for investment all along the border, leveraging the clearly necessary building of that wall. It will be a beautiful wall, but it will be a wall which is actually an integrated security system, which serves communities and businesses on both sides of the border, all along the border. And this can clearly be done. We'll have to create a water infrastructure. By doing that, we're going to solve a lot of our climate change problems. I'm talking about adjusting for things like the drought. One of the things we need to do in this country is deal with drought, because for whatever reason, we've seen a tremendous increase of drought, and this is something we can fight in California and all along the Mexican border by developing a water infrastructure in an integrated economic zone. So the 3 steps of Donald Trump are all integrated in my plan. My plan is the best way to do it. I have no doubt that Donald Trump, as he proceeds towards building that wall, that he will recognize the value of these other approaches, in addition to that fundamental need to secure the border, to increase the legalization and offer jobs to Americans first. But this will create opportunity in Mexico and here. And if people don't have citizenship, they'll then have a certain period of time, say 1 or 2 years, so it'll be similar to the original treaty, to give people time after the ratification of this arrangement to choose what they're going to do. They will have certain viable choices for their citizenship. For most, it will be like Trump's plan, to decide to go south of the border, possibly look for work there in the enterprise zone, and then to lock that in. So this is in addition to what Trump is proposing. But he's proposing that the great ones, the good ones, if their employers want them, could then return, but with a legal status, whether or not that status is full citizenship. Now I want to talk about Trump's plan, how it actually works, because I understand this because I went to read it. Most people listen to the media, so they're not going to know anything because the media has its own motives. Basically, they're not very honest people, but they do their jobs, which is usually to read whatever is put in front of them for broadcast. So that's what you hear. So I'll tell you what Trump's plan actually is. First, I want to tie things up and show you how it's important we have bilateral cooperation all along the border, to secure the border for mutual security, to have human rights on both sides of the border, in both countries. That means we're building democracy, we're building civil liberties to go along with private property, and the ability to have lawful enforcement of contracts, so contractual rights will be clearly delineated and will protect investments and also protect the rights of workers. There could be unionization of workers, but we would not want to disrupt the development, and so unionization is something that should be left to the regulation of the states, of the United States of America and the United States of Mexico. And everybody should work together to create real opportunity and rights for workers, investors, and owners alike, management alike. And this is a world-class time. These are two world-class civilizations. There's tremendous educational levels in technology in Mexico. There always have been. There can be more as the opportunities for advanced development, industrial development in Mexico and the United States emerge. And so again, securing the border, increasing legalization and citizenship, and finally giving jobs in the United States to Americans first, and I'm sure on the Mexican side to Mexicans first. And so those are Trump's 3 principles. I think they are the right principles. Now I just want to run over what he actually has said about building the wall. He wants to force Mexico to the table to build that wall. Now, the initial communications, perhaps, on both sides have been a little rough. From the Mexican point of view, the accusation, as it were, public accusation that Trump's presidency is needed because of the treatment that we're getting at the hands of the Mexican government, because they're so much smarter than us. I don't doubt that, but obviously they could easily take offense in Mexico. But we have so much better options than to take offense, because if we can work together with the various perceptions and interests of our two nations, I have shown what can be accomplished. It would add 2% to our GDP, and I'm sure would do the same for Mexico. So how did Trump want to get them to the table? What he showed was the leverage that we now have, and we do have that leverage. And I have also shown how the main leverage, which is this $47 billion being sent back in illegal wages to Mexico and the Mexican government each year, illegal wages which is earned and returned to Mexico each year from the United States, that can be impounded, but can easily be replaced also for Mexico under my plan. I'm not saying it be kept, but it be impounded to remove the incentive. But it could easily be replaced for Mexico under my plan with taxes based on commercial and industrial development all along the Mexican border with the greatest trading partner in the world, the USA. But right now, it's leverage. What is the leverage that the U.S. has? Well, they're basically over legal immigration. Now, it is true that if things went wrong in this bartering, it could put at risk our mutual benefits, which we now enjoy from trade. Certainly, I don't think Trump wants to do that. I don't think Mexico wants to do that. We're two intelligent countries, both with intelligent leaders. And here's the idea. we would have intelligent leaders in the United States, which I fully agree with Trump. That's what we need. There are many, many areas in which we need clear thinking and intelligence, and this is one of the most important ones. So that's the leverage that we have. There's a list, but for instance, there's people that are coming across the border, about 1 million a day, coming across the border to work in the United States. Across the bridge, they get a document, totally legal, put in their work. For years and years, they return to the Mexican side of the border. These people could be charged a higher fee in order to collect money that we would get to have to pay for the border. And this, by the way, is very similar to what I'm talking about, that there would be an integrated zone. But more of those million jobs would be for Americans, and there would be more jobs on the southern side of that border. Now, this is not continuous along the border. It's centered in certain cities. Usually there is a U.S. city across the border from a Mexican city. So, for instance, you've got El Paso, Texas, a large U.S. city, which means the pass through the mountains to Mexico, and I believe it's to Mexico, to and from Mexico. And then on the other side, you've got Juarez. Now, it's not separated by a mountain pass, those two cities. They're separated by the Rio Grande River. But this is kind of a binational development that has naturally happened. And we need to build on that. And I believe that those cities should be able to have security that is effective for crossing the border. And so we need more and more of that. And then because it's going to create so much wealth, then that needs to be extended to have a wall even in those areas where you don't have those cities. But you're also going to do that with a plan in mind to build economic development and communities. So you're going to slow down the run across the border because there's going to be so much going on the southern side of the border. And I think the maquiladoras was an attempt to do that. The problem is those companies that set up factories in Mexico, they ended up just kind of setting up factories in Mexico, creating this giant sucking sound, as Perot said, from the United States into Mexico. That was our jobs going across. So we've got to put an end to that giant sucking sound, and we've got to put an end now to a totally out of control border in which we think people can just come in and have a baby and then everybody's a citizen. I mean, this is a total breakdown of civilization, actually. It's not just a breakdown of our country. We've got two great civilizations, and we can create two great countries with a secure border, but one that integrates both of our countries rather than merely separates and divides us. And so he uses this leverage to get the Mexican government to the table. And I would like to do this in a smart way. There's been some competition between Mexico is now going to raise rates for Americans going to $20 a day, so maybe they're going to try to offset the money that Trump's going to try to get, so it'll really be us building the wall. But this seems like a very dumb way to approach it, but this is the kind of leverage that is available. We've also got Mexican business executives coming in. We've got lists of things I didn't even know about. Perhaps air travel, you could charge more to come into the country. There's various kinds of tariffs and fees that we can put on, if necessary, to collect the money for that wall. Now, I think the biggest question about the wall is not who's going to pay for it, but who's going to build it, and again, how it's going to define that border. I think one of the reasons Trump talked about Mexico paying for it is the very sensible reason as a businessman is obviously a cost, especially if it's going to be an effective wall. And you don't, as a businessman, you don't want to get to the point where your investment doesn't even make sense because it has no effectiveness at all. And so then you haven't got anywhere. And I think that by showing this option of cooperation of the border, as I am doing, cooperation along the border based on the treaty that has created that border and created the relationships, the relations between our two great countries, this advances the plan that Trump has set out there. And I've heard some people say, well, I own some land down there, and I don't want you to tell me what to do with my land. they might say, well, I don't, you don't tell me whether we're going to develop around where I live. I might not like it. And of course, those kinds of things always have to be worked out by governments. I would imagine that states on both sides would have some say in the terms to be worked out, say of eminent domain or other uses of federal or state land where people could be fairly reimbursed, and for the public good, we could develop a lot of enterprise. But certainly, we need the wall along that border, and I think anybody would agree that it's better to have an opportunity to have a beautiful neighborhood and beautiful, modern, developed community and society nearby where things are orderly and you still have the beauty of nature and the beauty of the vast West or South or wherever it is, and yet it's also the beauty of cooperation and of being good neighbors and having all of these problems resolved. I have no doubt that once it is shown that the money going back to Mexico can be impounded, that this will have a great impact on the return of citizens to Mexico. Because the incentive will not be there for Mexico to continue this. They will help to build the wall, but again, what is this going to be replaced with? Now, Trump has said that if the people, if there's 11 million here now, they go back to Mexico and become citizens, they can come back and possibly be citizens. Their citizenship is not clear, but they can continue with legal status in their work for the American employers if they're great or if they're good. I'm sure that with the added rule that those jobs have to be offered to Americans first, that there will be some jobs opening up there for Americans. And I'm sure that if some of those are filled by Americans, that some of those who have recommendation as great or good workers could also come back and fill some of the jobs that can't be filled. But if you can see this as a fundamental shift in the arrangement that I'm proposing, you would see that we do not have to constantly worry about the flow of immigrants north of the border because there's no opportunity south of the border. We have to do it all at once, and we need to create this opportunity south of the border. It fundamentally changes the equation. This is what I'm proposing. I'm also proposing there's opportunity in Spanish and English within this international zone. That there's opportunity for jobs and even business ownership along the lines of affirmative action for Chicanos, by which I mean the people who were the first citizens here because they stayed north of the border, people who lost land because of the stripping out of the Mexican land titles by the Senate when it ratified that treaty. Certainly there should be something in which all of those people can be treated fairly by being given this affirmative action. Now, Teresa Collette, candidate for the House for the Republicans, bashed me in a debate in 2010 on television that why should people have to learn Spanish? Well, it's just like why should people have to learn English? The thing that really motivates you is an incentive. And if you're going to have more opportunity because you respect the Spanish language and you acquire it, if you find some translators or something that you can work with, that you're going to benefit from that. But certainly we should be speaking English here in this country so that anybody who wants to be a success in this country will want to speak English. However, I also agree with Marco Rubio. There's a benefit from speaking Spanish, that you should be able to speak Spanish to get across the important things that need to be learned at any given moment. We have a need to have a flow of communication that's also certain information which is important, so that the wise people of the Spanish speakers would be able to transmit that information to the young people of their families and their communities, and absolutely we need that, as Marco Rubio said, so that we can commit together to cooperation and to good neighbor relationships. It's not about a competition between Spanish and English about which is better and which is worse. And if Americans don't want to learn Spanish, I think that should be their right. They should not have to learn Spanish. It shouldn't be a law that you have to learn anything. That's a very bad way to learn. However, learning is good. And in that international border zone, we'll have to make sure that certain information gets to everybody in Spanish or English so that we can work as a team. And we can work in cooperation with bilateral human rights and security, and then go forward in productivity and building a land that maybe nobody ever dreamed of. except some people in Texas, where we were so successful working together with Sam Houston and the American settlers, and then the Mexican state was established by Mexico. We were both working together in cooperation. It was called Texas. But the people of Mexico City felt it would break off and was getting too independent. And so they started this war, which finally resulted in defining this territory through, I'm sure, a very tragic war, but one whose benefit for both countries should not be lost, because it did establish good neighbor relationships between the two great nations and civilizations and this border. So I'm talking about a new community, and really a new American dream along that border, which reflects the American dream of the Spanish and the American dream of the Anglos, in the very same way that we have reflected in this continent the American dream of the French and the English, and indeed of people from all over the world, all over Europe, my own people, the Scandinavians. And I have a book published in Sweden that is titled Drömmen in Amerika. It means the American dream. And we can go forward. And it would be stupid leaders controlling the situation, as Trump likes to say, if we did not take advantage of this opportunity that lies before us. I'm Steve Carlson. I'm running for President of the United States in 2016 as an independent from Minnesota. I approve this message and thank you for listening.